Today we're looking at The Invention of Tomorrow. It's a book exploring human foresight, and I gotta say, I'm fascinated by this whole idea of mental time travel. This, uniquely human thing to basically journey through time just using our minds.
It really is something, isn't it? And that's actually what the book is all about at its core, that this mental time machine, as they put it, that's what truly makes us different, sets us apart.
So, okay, I'm with you, but let's kind of unpack that a bit.
Yeah.
It's more than just remembering what happened in the past, right? It's got to be about actually picturing the future, like really vividly.
Right. That's the distinction they draw between episodic memory, which is like recalling specific events from your past, and then there's episodic foresight, which is like you're actually imagining really specifically things that could happen in the future. They even bring up, I would say, the Iceman. Like the guy's tools and supplies, how meticulously he planned everything, suggests that even way back then there was some form of foresight going on.
So hold on, are they saying our brains actually work like literal time machines? Like you can project ourselves into these future scenarios almost like we're there.
That's the whole premise.
Yeah.
They use this really interesting analogy to explain it. They compare it to a stage production, like in a theater. So imagine the stage is where everything unfolds. You've got actors representing you, other people, sets with all these specific details.
Hold up. So there's got to be a playwright, right? Someone's writing the story, then a director making all the calls, and even like, I don't know, an executive producer making sure the whole thing comes together. And our brains are doing all of this.
It's a really captivating way to think about how complex this whole process is. And it's not just one single ability, this mental time machine. It's more like a system with all these interconnected parts. And it develops, gradually as we grow up. Think about it. Not every 3-year-old understands tomorrow. The book mentions a study, only about 40% of parents said their kids used the word correctly at that age.
Makes you think, how did this amazing ability to see into the future, how did it even evolve in the first place? Like what pushed us to develop that?
Well, the book digs into that. They talk about fire, how it was such a huge turning point for humans. Even using fire required some basic foresight. Gathering fuel, keeping the flames going, you had to anticipate what you needed to do.
And remember, the earliest evidence we have of using fire goes back like almost 800,000 years. That's a long time for humans to be honing this foresight thing.
And they also talk about tools, how making tools evolved. It shows how our foresight got better over time. Compare the simple Oldowan tools to, say, the Acheulean tools. Those were way more complex, needed multiple steps, planning ahead. Each stage, you had to see the final tool, the steps to get there.
So it's not just about reacting to what's happening right now. It's about actively shaping the future.
And that's a key point the book makes. Human evolution, our culture, it's not just trial and error or, simply copying each other. We come up with new things, we imagine different possibilities, and this is crucial, we understand how what we create can be useful in the future.
But doesn't that mean we need a level of awareness that goes like beyond instinct?
Yeah.
It's not just knowing what something is, it's knowing what it could become.
Absolutely. And they give this really interesting example, the wheel. It was invented in pre-Columbian Mexico. But here's the thing, they only used it for kids' toys.
So the technology was there,
Yeah.
but they didn't see the bigger picture, how else they could use it. That's wild. It shows foresight goes beyond just inventing something. It's about seeing its potential.
And seeing that potential, it all comes down to how our brains process, how we anticipate what's going to happen.
The book also explores whether other animals have foresight, which is a question that's fascinated scientists and philosophers for centuries.
It's a really interesting question, and there's a lot of debate about it. There's evidence that some animals show anticipatory behaviors like caching food or using tools.
But there's a clear difference between those instinctual responses and the flexible, open-ended foresight that humans have. Building a nest or storing food for winter isn't the same as designing a self-driving car or planning a mission to Mars.
Right. So far, there's no evidence that any other species can mentally time travel the way we do, imagining multiple possible futures and making decisions based on those simulations.
If foresight is so important for our success as a species, why haven't other animals evolved this capacity?
The book goes into a few possible explanations. One is the complexity of the cognitive mechanisms involved. Mental time travel requires a sophisticated interplay of memory, imagination, and executive control.
And those abilities might come with a big metabolic cost. Our brains use a lot of energy, and maintaining this capacity for complex foresight might mean that we have to trade off other functions.
Another factor could be the social nature of human intelligence. We're collaborators. We share knowledge and build upon each other's insights.
It's not just about individual brains getting bigger or smarter. It's about brains working together, pooling their predictive powers. It's about collective foresight.
And that brings us back to the main idea of the invention of tomorrow. Foresight is what makes us human. It's what sets us apart from all other animals.
It's this capacity for foresight that has allowed us to shape our environment, create complex cultures and technologies, and ultimately become the dominant species on the planet. But it's also the ability that confronts us with these unprecedented challenges. It forces us to grapple with our impact on the planet and the future we're creating.
As the authors say, foresight is a double-edged sword. It's the source of both our greatest triumphs and our most pressing dilemmas.
This makes me think about how some people seem to be more focused on the past, while others are all about the present, and then there are those who are always looking ahead.
You've hit on a key concept there, time perspective. And these perspectives, they influence the choices we make, how we spend our time and energy, and even our priorities in life.
It reminds me of that marshmallow test,
Oh, yeah.
where kids could eat one marshmallow right away or wait and get two. The ones who could delay gratification. They showed a stronger future orientation. They generally did better later in life.
Right. It's not just about waiting for rewards, though. It's about this ability to envision the future, to actively participate in shaping who we want to become.
So it's like we're not just passively observing time, we're actively shaping it.
Yes. Our foresight allows us to be the architects of our own destinies. It could be acquiring new skills, changing how we look, refining our senses, all driven by aspirations for our future selves.
That's a powerful thought. We're not just along for the ride.
Yeah.
We're actually shaping the journey.
It really underscores the implications of this unique human capacity. And that's what the book really delves into, how we utilize that capacity.
But if our brains are so good at predicting, why do we still make mistakes? Why are we sometimes wrong about the future?
That's a great question. The book also examines the limitations of our foresight. And one factor is ambiguity. Our senses don't give us a perfect picture of reality.
Like with the coffee cup example, there's always some interpretation involved. Our brains have to fill in the gaps, make educated guesses based on limited information.
Right. And those guesses, they're influenced by our biases, our past experiences, and even our emotions.
So even with all this predicting going on, errors are bound to happen.
Exactly. Unforeseen events can throw us off course.
But those errors, like you said earlier, they can be opportunities to learn to reevaluate our predictions and adapt our strategies.
Precisely. They highlight this dynamic back and forth between our internal model of the world and the external reality that we're engaging with. And this adaptation, this constant refining of our predictions, it's a key theme in the book. It's not just about us learning as individuals, but about how foresight evolved as a species, over millions of years.
So how did this incredible ability develop? Did early humans just wake up one day with the power of foresight?
Not quite. Even simple organisms, they show some anticipatory behaviors, like squirrels storing nuts for the winter or plants growing towards the sunlight.
But those are mostly instinctive, right? Like pre-programmed behaviors. It's not the same as humans planning a trip to Mars.
The big leap happens when we see complex planning in early humans. And we can actually trace this through the evolution of tools, like starting with Oldowan tools, those simple stone flakes that Homo habilis used over 2 million years ago.
Yeah, I can see that. Like a sharp edge is good for cutting.
Right.
And you can shape a stone to make that edge. Even that simple realization requires some level of foresight.
It shows like a basic understanding of cause and effect. But then we see a huge advancement with the Acheulean tools, those symmetrical hand axes associated with Homo erectus.
Oh, yeah, those are beautiful.
To make those tools, you needed a multi-step plan. You had to have a vision of the final product before you even started.
So they had to hold that mental image in their minds while they were skillfully shaping the stone. That suggests a much more sophisticated level of mental time travel.
And these tools were often transported, carried over long distances, which means they were planning for future needs, not just immediate ones.
So the tools themselves are like a physical record of our ancestors' growing capacity for foresight.
Yes. And it's not just about individual ingenuity. The development of culture is crucial, too. The ability to pass knowledge down through generations. Language becomes essential because it allows for precise communication of complex ideas, strategies, and techniques.
So it's this collective foresight, this shared knowledge, that really drives innovation and sets the stage for even bigger leaps in human evolution.
The book describes the brain as like a prediction machine, constantly using these internal models shaped by our experiences to kind of anticipate what's next.
So our brains are basically like supercomputers running simulations all the time, trying to predict what'll happen based on different actions scenarios. But if that's true, why do we still make so many mistakes?
Ah, now that's where things get even more interesting. The book goes into all the complexities of these prediction mechanisms in our brains and how sometimes those very mechanisms can lead us down the wrong path.
Definitely want to dive into that more. But before we go there, one thing I'm curious about, we talked about the mental time machine, but what about the physical part? What's actually going on in our brains when we do this mental time travel?
Neuroscience is starting to give us some clues. Research using brain imaging shows that when we remember things from the past and when we imagine things in the future, similar brain regions are active. It's almost like our brains are using the same neural machinery for traveling through time in both directions.
Wow, so it's not like our brains clearly separate past and future, huh?
Hmm.
That's kind of mind-blowing.
It is. But like with any powerful tool, being able to project ourselves into the future, it comes with its own challenges.
Like, I don't know, anxiety, worry from constantly thinking about what might happen. I can definitely relate to that.
Exactly. The book points out that being aware of the future, all the possibilities, it can lead to existential dread, realizing that, our time is limited.
So it's not all sunshine and rainbows, future vacations, dream jobs. It's also about deadlines, potential dangers, the whole, our time is finite thing.
Yeah, it's a whole mix of possibilities, good and bad. And as humans with this incredible ability to foresee, it's something we have to learn to navigate.
This has given me a lot to think about. But before we get deeper into all that, one thing I'm wondering, what about animals? Do they experience anything even remotely like this human foresight? Or is it really like a human thing?
That's the question, isn't it? It's been puzzling scientists for a long time. Some animals, sure, they show planning skills. Squirrels storing food for winter, crows using tools to get to food. But the book argues that these behaviors are often, just instinct or limited in how far ahead they can plan.
So a dolphin might be able to plan a few steps ahead, but it's not going to be, writing a novel or planning its retirement.
Exactly. There's no real proof that animals can imagine or talk about distant future events the way we do. They did studies with dolphins, for example. They can plan, but they make the same mistakes over and over, which suggests their foresight might be, kind of restricted compared to ours.
Makes sense. So this whole thing, being able to imagine and really manipulate these complex future scenarios, that seems to be what sets us apart.
And that's what's allowed us to develop all these tools and systems, things that make our foresight even better. We can manage uncertainty, collaborate on big projects, even shape the course of history.
Which brings us perfectly to the next part of our deep dive. We're going to explore those tools, how they impact how we see and interact with time. But for now, let's take a moment to, really absorb everything we've learned about this incredible mental time travel thing.
It really is a fascinating journey into what makes us human, and honestly, we've only just begun to scratch the surface.
Yeah.
Picking up where we left off, the book really goes into these amazing tools humans have developed to extend our natural ability for foresight. And they're not just simple helpers, they actually change how we see and interact with time.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing to think about how these external systems have actually shaped human history,
Yeah.
right? We're not just relying on our brains alone anymore. We've built these intricate tools to help us manage time, information,
Yeah.
even our own behavior, really.
Exactly. And the book makes this point about, how important these tools have been for those really big, complex projects, collaborations that just wouldn't happen if we didn't have a shared understanding of time and the future.
Okay, well, let's start with something that seems so basic now, the calendar. I mean, I can't imagine life without one. But think about how groundbreaking it must have been for those early humans, you know, to actually start tracking the cycles of the sun and moon.
Oh, it was revolutionary. Being able to anticipate the changes in seasons, to know when to plant and harvest, to plan things way in advance, it really transformed human societies.
Yeah, like without a calendar, you're just at the mercy of nature's whims, right? But with one, you can start to, I don't know, impose some order, plan for the future in a way that just wasn't possible before.
And that ability to predict and plan, it had this ripple effect on everything from agriculture to, how societies were structured. The book even argues that agriculture itself wouldn't have been possible without the foresight that came with having calendars.
That makes sense. Can you imagine trying to coordinate like a huge farming operation without a way to keep track of the seasons, when to plant, when to harvest? It would be total chaos.
And even beyond agriculture, calendars made it possible to have more complex social organizations, scheduling meetings, festivals, religious ceremonies. All of a sudden, it was all possible because we had this shared way of understanding time.
It's just amazing to me how something that seems so simple, like a calendar,
Yeah.
could have such a huge impact on human civilization.
Yeah.
But calendars are just one part of it, right? Humans also figured out ways to record and transmit information across time, and that's where writing comes in.
Yeah, writing, it's like the ultimate external memory bank. With writing, we could save knowledge, share stories, pass down, wisdom to future generations.
And that had to have a massive impact on our ability to foresee and shape the future. Imagine, every generation having to start from scratch, having to rediscover the same knowledge, making the same mistakes.
It would really hold us back. But with writing, we could build on the experiences and insights of those who came before us, build up knowledge, and that's a cornerstone of scientific advancement and innovation.
I remember the book gives this really fascinating example. The Aboriginal Australian songlines, these oral traditions, they actually encode all sorts of information about the landscape, resources, the history of a place.
Those songlines are like an external memory map. They guide people over huge distances and connect them to the knowledge of their ancestors. It's a really beautiful example of how passing down knowledge, culturally enhances our foresight.
So it's like those songs aren't just entertainment. They're this sophisticated system for transmitting knowledge and foresight across generations.
Exactly. And speaking of transmitting knowledge, we can't forget about financial systems. They've played a big role in enhancing foresight. From simple bartering to, complex banking networks, these systems let us plan for the future in ways that just wouldn't be possible otherwise.
Money, right? The great motivator and sometimes the source of a lot of anxiety. But you're right. It lets us think beyond, just our immediate needs and manage resources over the long term.
Right. Saving for retirement, investing in your kids' education, even funding those ambitious projects like sending people to the moon. These all become possibilities when we have systems to manage resources across time.
So money becomes like a tool, a way to translate foresight into, concrete actions and results. It's really remarkable how these systems have evolved alongside our increasing ability to envision and plan for the future.
And as financial systems have become more and more sophisticated, so has our ability to manage risk, to plan for those unexpected things, even influence future outcomes through, investments and all these financial instruments. It's a complex and constantly changing landscape.
It really is incredible how humans have created all these external tools to basically amplify our natural capacity for foresight. But the book makes a really important point. These tools don't just passively help us. They actually change the way we think and interact with the world.
They reshape our perception of time itself. Think about the invention of the clock. All of a sudden, time became something we could measure precisely, quantify it. It shifted our focus from, cyclical patterns to this idea of linear progression.
It's like before clocks, time was this fluid experiential thing, right?
Yeah.
But with clocks, it became this rigid grid that we had to follow. I can see how that would have a huge impact on everything from work schedules to, our own sense of self.
Absolutely. And this highlights the dynamic relationship between, how our minds work and the tools we create. We're constantly co-evolving with our technology. It shapes us just as much as we shape it.
So it's not just that we use tools to enhance foresight. The tools themselves actually redefine what foresight means to us.
That's a great point. It underscores how interconnected our internal mental processes are with the external systems we create. And it's something we really have to be aware of, especially as we keep developing more and more sophisticated technologies.
It makes you wonder, as we become more reliant on these external systems, do we risk, losing touch with our own natural ability for foresight?
That's a really interesting question and definitely one worth exploring further. But before we get into that, I think it's important to acknowledge that human foresight, it's not just this rational, calculated process we've been talking about.
You're right. We've been focusing on, tools and systems, but we're not robots, right? We're emotional beings.
Yeah.
We have desires, fears, biases that drive us.
Our foresight is often, colored by emotions, by irrational beliefs, and that can sometimes lead us astray.
Well, that's a perfect segue into the next part of our discussion. Let's explore some of those pitfalls, those biases that can cloud our judgment and lead us to, well, maybe not the best outcomes.
That's where things get really interesting. We'll delve into those cognitive biases, how our brains can sometimes trick us and what we can do to avoid those traps.
Okay, so picking up from those cognitive biases, the ones that can, mess with our foresight, what about the specific ones the book talks about? What are some of those ways our brains can kind of trick us when we're trying to picture the future?
Well, one that pops up all the time is it's called the optimism bias. It's our tendency to overestimate the chances of good things happening and downplay the bad stuff.
Oh, yeah, I know that one. It's like we all think we're going to win the lottery, even though the odds are ridiculously small.
Yeah.
Or we don't really consider the risks when we start something new. We're just focused on all the ways it could go right.
And while, some optimism is good, it can be motivating, too much of it can lead to bad decisions, especially when you're planning for the long term. The book also talks about the planning fallacy, which is basically we always underestimate how long things will actually take.
Ugh, that's me all the time. I'm always way too optimistic about how fast I can get things done, which means, well, missed deadlines, a lot of scrambling at the last minute. Why do we do that to ourselves?
It seems like it's a bunch of things. We tend to focus on the ideal scenario, like everything's going perfectly, and we often forget to factor in those unexpected delays, the things that can go wrong.
So we're basically running these overly optimistic simulations in our heads, ignoring all the potential roadblocks and setbacks.
Kind of like, yeah, looking at the future through rose-colored glasses. And those rosy hues, they might get us going in the short term, but later on they can lead to, disappointment, frustration.
Okay, so how do we fight these biases?
Mm.
Are we just stuck making the same mistakes over and over?
Not necessarily. And the book gives some practical tips for dealing with these cognitive traps. For the planning fallacy, they say break down those big tasks into smaller, more manageable chunks and set realistic deadlines, based on what's happened in the past or actual data.
That makes sense. When you break things down, you get a better picture of how much time and effort is actually involved.
Mm.
But what about the optimism bias? How do we, tone down that natural tendency to be overly optimistic?
The book says it's important to get feedback from others, especially people who might have a more objective view of our plans, what we're trying to do, and also to really take the time to think about potential downsides, risks that, we might be missing.
So it's about balancing that natural optimism with some realism and being open to different points of view. That's good advice for pretty much anything, not just planning.
For sure. And it gets to a key point the book makes about foresight. It's not just an individual thing. We can make it better, more accurate by working together, sharing information, and looking for those different perspectives.
It's like we can, I don't know, create a safety net for each other, helping to spot and deal with those individual blind spots that can lead us off track.
That's a great way to put it. It really speaks to the incredible potential of human foresight when we use it together, By combining our knowledge, our experiences, all those different ways of thinking, we can make better decisions, tackle those tough challenges, and shape a future that's good for everyone.
That's pretty inspiring. And it brings us back to the core idea of the book, right? This ability to see into the future, to shape it. That's what makes us humans, where our creativity comes from, our ingenuity,
Yeah.
our ability to solve problems both on our own and together.
It's a gift, but it's also a responsibility. We have this amazing power to imagine, to create, but we also have to use it wisely, ethically.
That's a powerful reminder. This deep dive has been, well, it's been an amazing journey into all the complexities of human foresight. We've looked at its evolution, the tools we built to make it better, the biases that can distort it, and its incredible potential to shape the future.
It's been a fascinating exploration of what makes us uniquely human. And even though we've only scratched the surface, I hope it, encourages everyone to think more about this, to explore this extraordinary ability that we all have.
I know I'll be thinking about all this for a long time. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep imagining.